The Nicene Creed is the most significant document ever produced by the Church. Yet, shockingly, many evangelicals have little to no knowledge of this foundational document.
I've never heard of that.
This lack of awareness leads to two major errors that I often see in evangelical circles. Missteps that can be easily avoided. In today's video, I'm going to break down what these mistakes are, and why they matter for how we understand the foundations of our faith. Before we cover the errors, let me first introduce you to the Creed. First, you've probably heard of creeds and confessions before, but maybe you're unsure of how they differ from one another. So, a creed is a universal statement of essential Christian beliefs, which should be affirmed by all Christians. The three big ones are the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, and the Athanasian Creed. Now, a confession, by contrast, is a statement of doctrinal convictions by a specific tradition of Christianity. For example, you have the Westminster Confession of Faith, which is affirmed by Presbyterians, or you have the 39 Articles of Faith, which are affirmed by the Anglicans. So, the Nicene Creed is not a document made for a particular group of Christians, but for all Christians.
For all of us.
And thus, the content of the Nicene Creed only deals with the essentials of the faith. It was produced at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. The council was not regional, but an ecumenical council, meaning it had input from Christians all over the world, which also lends to its credibility and authority. The Nicene Creed is especially significant because it is a common document that defines the Christian faith, which is accepted by all three branches of Christianity, that being the Protestants, the Roman Catholic, and the Eastern Orthodox. It's also significant because it stood the test of time, having been created 1700 years ago. When an individual or a church affirms the Nicene Creed, they're connecting themselves to the historical and universal church. No one can say about the truths of the creed that that's just your interpretation of Christianity, for this is what the church has affirmed for at least 1700 years across the whole world and irrespective of denomination or theological tradition. But some evangelicals are unfamiliar with this creed, which leads them to the first error. So the first error is made by rejecting the use of the word Catholic in the creed. Here's what that line says. We believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. Now, an evangelical who's unfamiliar with church history and the creeds in general would typically say something like this. I'm not Roman Catholic, so I can't affirm this creed. I've heard this objection countless times because I actually founded a website that promoted Christian ebook deals, and when self-published authors submitted their ebook for promotion, I made them make 3 affirmations, and one of them was an affirmation of the Nicene Creed. Now, I got many emails like this, but I want to give you one as a sample of the type of responses I'd receive when asking them to affirm the Nicene Creed. This is how one lady wrote back. She said, I believe everything in the Nicene Creed except this line. We believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. I don't really know what that means. I'm not Catholic, I was raised Southern Baptist, and now I attend an Assembly of God church. Now, in the Creed, Catholic doesn't mean Roman Catholic, but rather it means universal. The Creed is an affirmation that though there are many congregation of churches in different regions, they are all part of the one universal church. There are not hundreds of Christianities, but one Christianity.
We're just one big happy family.
And at the time that this creed was written, there were no Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholic, or Protestant churches. There was just one undivided church. So the words don't refer to specific Christian traditions. And if you want further evidence of that, the Eastern Orthodox Church today affirms the Nicene Creed, and they for sure aren't affirming that they're a part of Rome.
We're not Catholics.
Now, Christians typically like making distinctions between capital and lowercase uses of words, which I actually think is helpful. So Protestant might say, I'm a lowercase Catholic, meaning they affirm that they are Catholic, but according to what the word means, not an uppercase Catholic, which would mean that they're part of the theological tradition of Roman Catholicism. So if you ask me, myself, what I affirm, I'm part of the church that's Catholic, Orthodox, and Apostolic. That means I'm part of the one universal church, Catholic, that teaches and holds to true doctrine, Orthodox, and that traces its origin and authority to the apostles who laid the foundation of the church, Apostolic. Now, what that doesn't mean is that I'm a part of Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, or Apostolic churches. Now let's move on to the second error, which often stems from a lack of familiarity with or an understanding of this important document. The second error that many evangelicals make is calling doctrines heresy that aren't affirmed in the creeds. Now, before I explain this error more fully, we need to first define and contrast heresy with theological error. So here's Robert Godfrey, who was a seminary president and now he's the chairman of Ligonier Ministries. Here's what he says.
But classically, the word heresy was used to describe those theological errors so serious that it would deprive one of salvation. And I think we ought to be using heresy more in that sense. Error is error. Error can be serious. Error can be small. Error is always bad to be avoided. But there are some errors that are so huge that they really are cutting us off from God, and because we have so misunderstood Him and His truth. And that's what heresy classically was used for in the church.
So heresy is a much more serious form of theological error, one that denies core established doctrines, like those taught in the creeds, and it's something that separates you from the universal church at the very least, and maybe from Christ as well. Now, theological errors, in contrast, can be big or small. They can have minimal effects, or they can have devastating effects on one's life and ministry, but they don't rise to the level of heresy. So out of a lack of familiarity with the creeds, or a lack of respect for the fact that the essentials of Christian doctrine have been defined historically, some evangelicals start emphasizing doctrines from their confession of faith or things they feel very strongly about in the Bible, and they call people heretics who deviate from their understanding of them. Now, if someone had a different view of, let's say, spiritual gifts, the sacraments, church government, or any list of doctrines not mentioned in the creeds, those views that don't conform to scripture would be errors, not heresies. Now, don't misinterpret me that errors do not matter. Some errors can greatly affect one's life, and it's loving to correct error. But notice the difference between how errors and heresies are dealt with in the New Testament. Apollos had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and being fervent in spirit, he spoke and taught accurately the things concerning Jesus, though he knew only the baptism of John. He began to speak boldly in the synagogue, but when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they took him aside and explained to him the way of God more accurately. Now, here Priscilla and Aquila hear an error from Apollos, so they take him aside and teach him the truth. But now listen to how Peter deals with heresy. As there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the master that bought them, bringing upon themselves swift destruction. Their condemnation from long ago is not idle, and their destruction is not asleep. Now here Peter takes a completely different tone. He labels them false teachers,
False, patently false.
and says that destruction is coming upon them.
Judgment Day is inevitable.
Now just one word of clarification before I leave this point. The creeds deal with orthodoxy, not orthopraxy. Or in other words, they deal with what is correct Christian beliefs, not Christian practices. So it's fine to label something like sexual deviance, heresy, because that's not what the purpose and intention of the creeds were. So as an action step, use this video as a wake-up call to become more familiar with the creeds, but especially the Nicene Creed. It's a foundational document of our faith and a time-tested way to articulate basic and essential Christian beliefs. If you'd like to read more on this topic and learn more about the importance of creeds in Christian life, read The Creedal Imperative by Carl Trueman. Or if you already believe that they're very important but would just like to learn more about their content alongside other church councils besides Nicaea, read Know the Creeds and Councils by Justin Holcomb. That book was actually an assigned text for me at Moody Bible Institute and is really critical for me at that particular point in my life. Really highly recommended read. Finally, if you'd like another way to learn the Nicene Creed instead of just reciting it, check out this song, which is just the full text of the Creed put to music. I'm actually a member of this church, and we sing it or the Apostles' Creed every week as a reminder of what unites us as believers. You see, some of us in the pews have different views on various secondary issues, but this creed unites us together as part of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Before you go, if you found value in this video, would you mind clicking the like button before you leave? Also, if you want something else to watch, you can check out this video right here. And if you want more content like this in your feed, you can subscribe to my channel right here. Thanks so much for watching.